Today I'm going to walk you through making a pattern, I hope, for a 18-inch Prism parallel straight edge that accepts the core that I recently showed the packing and formulation of. So we start out with 3D printed. This is 3D printed and then painted with lacquer pattern. Sits in here about like so. And to help it separate from the sand that we're going to put on there, we're going to dust it with a light dusting of graphite. Traditionally, people use talc as a parting compound, or separating compound, and I like the graphite a little better. And then this pattern is going to have a riser, and this is the pattern for that riser. And then this right here is a sprue that's going to allow the metal to get down into the drag of the pattern, which is going to go on here. You'll see how this comes together, I think, as we move along. For starters, we're going to use some face sand, which is over here. This is freshly mixed sand that's never been used before, and I use it for facing sand because it gives a nicer finish. And this right here is backing sand. This sand has been used goodness knows how many times, a lot. So we'll start out by getting some face sand on there, and I'm kind of stingy with that, trying to use it as economically as possible. We're going to riddle it through this screen because it takes out any lumps and bumps and just makes the sand nicer to work with. So I just work over it like so. You can see sand starting to come down onto the pattern there, and we'll use our hands to mold it up against the pattern some too. I don't worry about using facing sand on the riser and sprue, as those are parts that are just going to be broken off or cut off and remelded later anyway. But I do care about the finish on the main part of the pattern itself. A little more facing sand here. And the facing sand consists of olivine sand with some western bentonite, southern bentonite, and 8% coal. The sand itself is 100 mesh olivine. I think that's enough facing sand. Let's see how that looks. So I kind of coax it up onto the pattern like so, rather than just put a whole slew of sand in there that mounds up by itself. It can, because of the molding characteristics of the sand, it's possible to push it up into place a little bit. And we'll do that. Grab just a little bit more here to put down on this corner. You can't see probably very well from there, but this corner is not very well covered. We'll be reasonably covered here in a moment. That's good. All right, and then this will be put there in place. Next comes just regular backing sand. And I riddle in a little bit of that too, but mostly I end up dumping in backing sand because it's the face sand that the iron will see and the surface will reflect. Okay. So we'll bring some of that backing sand up there, and then we'll just start scooping it in and putting it in there. Like so. Now, you probably saw this little piece move just a bit as I was dumping sand in. And that's something I have to watch out for, that I don't accidentally displace it a lot. you'll see how we kind of cope with that. I come along here and sort of tuck the sand in just a little bit, and just that little bit of tucking in starts to hold the pattern where I want it. And then I put a little bit of sand there because I want this piece, the riser piece, to be more or less level with the crest of that pattern. And then I tucked in the sprue here a little bit. By just doing that little bit, I can be pretty confident those pieces won't move anymore as I go dumping sand. Like so. Then I just come along and pack it down, because you can see that sand really compresses. It looks like the mold was way overfilled, and I hope it is somewhat overfilled, but not as much as it might have appeared. Come along like so. And then, again, tuck it in around the edges. Classically, you're supposed to start around the outside of the mold and work toward the inside. And you're not supposed to start out with the blunt end of the packing tool there, but rather start out with the sharp end, as that gets the sand down better where you want it. And then here is that riser, and I want to get the sand packed in around it well. And you can imagine that since it has an undercut there, this part overhangs an empty space. It's kind of hard to get sand in underneath, so I use this little stick, nothing more than a stick, to pack in under that. That ensures that there's good solid sand under that riser overhang. So now we're getting kind of a good start on this. Looks like we probably need a bit more sand, so we'll get some more here. All right. If you watched earlier videos, you probably heard me make reference to a pneumatic rammer, and that's this. Runs off compressed air, obviously. Does a nice job of getting that sand packed in there. My hand around it like that, so that I'm just not kicking a whole slew of sand back in my face. Otherwise, I'm eating a lot of sand that I'd rather not. And then we're going to just use this piece of angle iron to clean off some of the excess sand here. See that screw poking through as it's supposed to. And then here's the crest of the pattern, that's fine. And then we're going to expose that riser as well, because we're going to need to see that so that we can get iron. It's hard to visualize right now, I suspect, but this whole works will be inverted. Iron's going to come down this sprue, and then it's going to flow over into this riser. You'll see that better in just a little bit. I expose the base of that riser pattern just like that. Work around the edges. Good. And that sort of adheres any loose sand bits. So now it's time to put on the drag of the board. Reach over here and get that. This is the drag, and you can see that it has registration pins that register in those holes right there. I'm going to clean those holes out just a little bit. So there's plenty of room for those pins that really never is a problem, but just one of these two. That's good. We don't need that screw getting into things. So this goes on here like so, and those two pins register it very nicely. Now we need to get this little backing plate off the bottom. That's pretty easy. This is nothing more than maybe 20 gauge steel with a couple of little angle iron pieces tacked onto it just to give it some stiffness. That goes back on later. You'll see that in a minute. But here we are, ready to pack in some more sand. But if I do that without putting some parting sand in there, I'm going to have trouble because it's not going to separate. So in this little container, I keep some sand just as it comes to me out of the bag. And I found the dry sand makes a really nice parting compound that works better than, again, the traditional talc. Or at least certainly as well, actually better than the traditional talc does. And that just prevents the drag sand, which we're going to pack momentarily, prevents the drag sand from adhering to that cheek sand. This mold is a little different than a lot of molds in that it does have three parts: the cope, the top part, the cheek, the middle part, and then the drag, the bottom part. Most of the time, most molds are just a cope and drag, but this particular pattern likes to be cast this way. All right, I think we're ready to put in some sand now here in the drag. And again, traditionally, I think you whittle in some sand first, but I haven't found that to be really necessary. I just dump in some sand here, and we seem to get good parting anyways. There's that. Dump in the better part of a bucket here. Each bucket weighs right about 50 pounds. Again, it looks like a whole lot of sand, but it does press down. Let's go ahead and tuck that in around the edges. Like so, and a little bit more of this. And I suspect that's enough sand, pretty much. All that drag, let's see, we'll get the pneumatic rammer out. Usually about 3 times around does the trick. trick pretty well, especially on a less critical part like this drag. Very good. Now, just blew out the holes that the bottom plate's going to go on. All right, put that back. Like so. Every 2 or 3 times I use the flask, I oil these holes. Makes the screws go in more easily. I see that I've got a little overlap here. I wonder if I'll be able to tap it back. Yep, there we go. There wasn't quite enough room on this hole to get this screw in. There we are. Now, to make this easier to lift and to keep the 2 parts together when I do lift it, I put a couple of little pieces on like so. We'll see how that works in a minute. Normally, I use my drill motor to tighten those up, but I forgot to bring it today, so I'll just tighten that like so, like so. Good. And we'll go to the other end. Do the same thing. These are 5/16 studs that I'm using to attach these little lifting bars. This is my own kind of cobbled together system. I don't know, I suppose other people have used something like it, but this is kind of unique to my foundry, I think, generally. This screw here is, bolt here is a little bit reluctant, so I can't quite run it all the way on finger tight. There we go, that's good. When I first started out, I was using my hoist to flip this mold, but when it's this pattern, flask, sorry. But I found it's quicker and easier, really, just to flip it by hand. So just bring it up like so. Flip it over. And now let's go ahead and put the cope on there and fill it up. Grab that. Pretty much the same idea as what we did before. Again, holes and registration pins that holds the cope onto the cheek and registers it well, so that when I go and take this apart and then reassemble it, everything is in the same register as it was. Then on top of this, part of the sprue goes the down sprue, and this square area right here, these are 3D printed parts. This square area will accommodate a ceramic filter, which again you'll get to see in just a little bit. Let's put some parting sand on there, some dry sand again, just like we did before. And I just spread it around like so. No real science to it, I just use enough so that we get good separation. When I use talc, sometimes the talc just didn't provide enough of a barrier, and I was getting areas of one layer that would stick to another layer, and that was kind of a problem. So let's go ahead and just dribble on some sand rather than riddle it on like, again, I say it's kind of traditional to do, but I don't think it's, in my case here, necessary. And then kind of like to have this piece line up with the part under it nicely. So again, if I tuck this in like so, that starts to stabilize it pretty well. That'll stabilize it quite well, so I can then be pretty rough with pouring more sand. You don't have to use any facing sand up here because this surface up here won't show in the final casting. So I just use all backing sand. Okay, now that this is the third time through, we got probably pretty well figured out just how this is going to go. But there's some more parts down the line here that I think are kind of possibly interesting. So let's see what we gotta get with. Let's tuck her in around the edges like we did. And I pay a little bit of extra attention right around the down sprue here to make sure that sand is really nice and firm, because I'm going to be carving some of that later, and you sure want it to not give way at the wrong time. So there's that. I just kind of feel like I probably need a little bit more sand there. So we're about 3 buckets in now, and I usually figure this takes about 3.5 buckets. Looks like that might pack in. Let's see what happens. I've got the cope cheek and drag here. I think this thing weighs something on the order of 150 pounds. And that's very possible to flip over manually, but it's a lot more controlled if I do it with my lips. So I'm going to take off the initial little binder down here. It's chilly out here, so I'd rather leave my gloves on, but the gloves are kind of clumsy for this kind of work. I'll put that there. We're going to go over and get this off over here. And then we'll get a lifting strap on here. I'm not sure what to call it. Let's see what I mean. Okay, that goes up there. And then, yep, the other way. Good. I actually I do lift this sometimes by hand, but not today, I think. And let's get the other strap on down here. There we go. Good. And one more. It's a real trick for me. I have to keep pretty close track of these little nuts and things in the sand. It's so easy to let one float off out of sight, and you find it later in the sand, sometimes kind of awkwardly. There we go. Good. That middle one doesn't have to be any more than just snug, because all it's doing is going to supply a support point for the lifting apparatus, which you'll see here in a minute. I wish I would have brought my drill motor, as that makes running these nuts in and out a whole lot faster, but I'm going to have to get along without them today. So now we got to take this whole works apart and get those pattern pieces out of there and make accommodations for the iron. And I guess I'll just go ahead and flip this. I want to get that sand stuck to the top of the cope there. So there we go. Like so. Loosen that one up. This one has to come off altogether. And this one can just come out of there. Let me just flip that out of the way. Put those in there like so. Same thing on this end. It's about 40 degrees in the barn today, which is cool enough. All right, there's that. We're done with the pneumatic rammer. I'll be using it more. Get this out of the way. Then we'll pull off the drag. There we go. And you can see that we got nice separation there. Here's the lump of sand that corresponds to the depression here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to pull out this little piece right here, the pattern for the riser. And that's done as follows. This is a little homemade, dreamed up device that works pretty well for me. You can see that little bit of sand that broke away there, and that's just fine because that was going to have to be, that has to be carved away anyways. And for that, I'll use this piece. Just take that out of there. And then over here, what's going to happen is the iron's going to come down here, and then it's going to be hard for you to see this. Maybe I can tilt it back so you can see better what I'm doing over here. I don't usually tilt it that way, but I don't see why that won't work. We need to make a passage from here, that is here, to here. That way the iron can flow into this area and up into the riser and into the mold through this spot right here. So just dig down here. Nothing real fancy here. Just dig a nice generous passage. There we go. That'll let the iron flow down through there nicely. Maybe make it just a tiny bit bigger. It's all by guess and by golly, based on good and bad experiences in the past. And a lot of times I like to brush down edges so there aren't any loose boogers of sand. Good. And then we're going to blow out this hole here. And I'm going to smooth this edge up right here. Because you don't want little bits of sand breaking off into the iron stream. That's what can cause crud in your casting, and it's something most definitely want to avoid. But I think we're ready to reassemble here, and to do that, use my lifting gear. I'm just going to come over here like so and make it in the way of the photographer. I'm going to have you take a break there, Kathy. So I'm going to use a radio control device that's embedded in this homemade box that runs the drill motor on this hoist. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds talking about the hoist today. Someday maybe we can go over that in a video. But suffice it to say that the drill motor up there runs the winch that reels in or out this dial-on strap, and ends up being a fairly workable device for what I need, where I can have both hands free, as you can see, and still control the hoist. And that's pretty handy when I'm trying to guide carefully the parts of the, I'm going to have to come down a little bit. Guide carefully the parts of the mold, one on top of the other, like we're going to do right now. So we're going to go up, and I want to be fairly balanced here, so we're going to have that like so. Let's see how it lifts. Okay, we'll flip her over like so, and then we traverse here. And I put it in the down orientation. And then I can look underneath and see those pins and the corresponding holes that they go in, and hopefully get lined up here without too much fiddling around. There's that one. And there we go. Now I hold down on the back, and I can kind of push and pull, and I can feel that those pins are where they need to be. Just go down and pull. There we are. So now it's time to reassemble the mold temporarily. And I guess I'll do the hand flipping rather than the use of the hoist, just because it'll be just a little bit quicker. And in this case, I want this to be a it's stuck, so I have to use a wrench on it. Same thing here, wrench, and here. There we are. That locks the whole works together so that we don't get pieces coming off of each other as I make that flip. Check this again. Yep, that's good. This up here, this goes up here. These pieces come down here out of the way. This goes all the way there. Good. This guy up. Flip it over. Okay. Great. Now, the next thing, we'll be making a pouring basin, and for that we're going to reposition the camera. So now what we have to do is make a pouring basin so I can get the iron into this mold, and we have to remove the pattern piece that we had there, and we'll pull out this down sprue pattern. So to do that, I just start carving away at that sand, and you can see that it cuts pretty nicely. It's pretty firm. The combinations of clays that's in there are selected so that they do provide nice adhesion properties. You could make some dandy sandcastles with this stuff, I'll tell you that. And side note, I think some of the famous beaches in the world that do have sandcastle building contests and are world renowned for that, believe it or not, actually naturally contain some of the clays that are useful in the foundry. I try to undercut the pouring basin just a little bit so that the iron doesn't go in and want to splash out. It goes in, hits that undercut, and kind of gets turned back into the basin, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure that does, but it is true. All right, so we'll get rid of this extra sand. We're going to blow out some extra sand in here. Very good. And I try not to leave a little fine ridge around that sprue entry there, because again, that's a bit of sand that could potentially break off. So, okay, that looks pretty good. Let's take it apart. Do basically the same thing that we did to the drag. I'm going to take this cope off. Okay, there's that there. Okay, that there. And then we need to loosen up the larger nut. I'm going to take it off altogether because I'm going to eventually want that on top, which will become evident a little later on why that is. These are nuts that I made on the lathe for this specific purpose. All right. Now, let's lift off the cope. And again, we've got a real nice clean separation, which I love. And you can see that we maintained registration pretty well, certainly well enough, with the pouring sprue, or the down sprue here, and this part here as well. So let's pull that pattern out. I'm just going to sweep away any extra sand right there. And then a little light tapping loosens it up. You can probably see it wiggling around in the sand a little bit there. And then I just tap it, and out it comes. Nice. And then we're going to take out the pattern here. That's the next thing. Kind of check to make sure there's a little bit of overlying sand right there. That would cause a breakout. Run my fingers along the edge, make sure everything is clear. Looks pretty good. Now we're going to make some room. Break the bond. There's a little bit of stickiness, of course, of the sand to the pattern. Wiggle it like that. That loosens it up a bit. Now I'm not going to go very much this way because that could break off some sand that occurs in that finger groove on the pattern. I've had trouble with that in the past, so we're not going to repeat that mistake if possible. Now to get that out in a nice controlled fashion, I like to put a little bar of some sort. This happens to be handy across there, and then we'll just tap up on one end, and you can see it starting to ease loose. And doing this, by having that bar in there, I can actually keep a little up pressure on both ends so that the pattern doesn't rock back and forth. And there we got a nice draw there. That looks pretty darn good. There is I can see a little cracking of sand there, that little bit. That doesn't actually matter, but it would matter if we didn't notice it. It could come loose later on and cause contamination of the casting. But we'll deal with that. Just come along here, and that's my technique. There's a way I could have avoided that by using a little water around the edge, but again, that part actually won't become part of the final casting. So I just come along, knock that back. Just doing that reduces the amount of sand that I have to blow out of here. So now let's clean it up a little bit. So that looks pretty clean. I am going to make a little recess down on this end of the mold so that in case there is any sand that should somehow along the line come free, it can flow down there, chances are, and fall into that little recess. It's not very big, and I doubt that you're going to see it very well there. But because we're looking down in a dark area with dark sand, and I don't know how in the world you can see that, but I did. You have to trust me. I carved out a little thing. That is good, and basically ready for us to now drop that core in. But before we do that, there's a couple steps that need to be done. First, got to take out this little down sprue pattern right here. Take much to loosen that up. And just draw it out kind of careful. Out it comes. Nice. That's great. And then, because quite a bit of gas is generated when the hot metal hits that epoxy impregnated core, I want to give a lot of space for a lot of chances for it to get out. So for that, I poke the sand a bunch of places, just make holes right to the surface up there, just like so. And in one of my videos where I showed an evening pour, you could see venting of the gases and actually burning some pretty blue flames coming up out of that. But those vents allow that gas up and out of there. So at this point, I think we're pretty much ready to go ahead and drop that core in here. For right this moment, I'm going to take a break and go get that core, and then we'll resume. Okay, here's the core. And as mentioned before, I pick it up with this piece of steel. I tip it over here because you saw a little bit of sand come off. I don't want that to fall into the mold here. And then here's where I'm very careful to try to fit it in just as gently and nicely as I can. And that went perfectly. That's so sweet, nice. And I also mentioned that I like to make sure that that core is not standing proud of the surface of the mold sand, and it is not standing proud. Let's see if I have a little straight edge I can bring across here. Right. So there's just a little space underneath. That's just right. Good. So at this point, the next step is an important one not to forget, and that is, let's put in a ceramic filter. This is very high temperature ceramic that allows the iron to flow through quite nicely, but separates out any boogers that might be in it. And this opening, that part right there is smaller than the filter, and so it prevents it from falling through. This is supposed to fit the filter and will fit the filter. So I just tuck it in like that. And I think it would stay there by itself, but I come along and just give the sand a little thumbprint here, here, and there. And that's sort of like staking it in, if you will, when you stake in a part in metalworking. You use a center punch and deform the metal a little bit. Same idea here. We just deform the sand. So now what we got to do is pick that cope up and get it back on here accurately. And that, once that's assembled, that mold is ready to pour. You might wonder about these pieces sticking up. Will they cause any harm? No, they're so small that they'll just push right up into that cope sand, no problem. So I think I'll take just maybe another break and hook up the lifting mechanism to the cope, not make you watch me fumble through that, and then we'll make our assembly moves. Okay, let's lift this guy back up and put him on. I guess it'll work better if I push that up. Okay, let's go the other way now. Hopefully things won't fall apart. I've had that happen in the past, but it happens less now than it used to happen. And you can see all the spots where the vents came through up here. Those are fine. Go down a little bit. Now let's find the registration holes. Got it. And check it. We're good. We'll just go down gently. Excellent. Well, that mold basically, except for getting the bars on it and the screws and nuts tightened up, is essentially ready to pour. Thanks for watching. I hope this gave you some idea of what goes on out here in the barn when I'm getting ready to pour one of these castings.